Hey there, Food Junkies listeners. Before we dive in, we've got something really special for you, and it's time sensitive. How does a free live stream ticket to the International Food Addiction Comorbidities Conference sound? That's a $140 value, and we're giving away 20 of them. Here's the deal. For every $25 US donation you make, your name goes into the draw. $50, that's 2 entries. $100, that's 4 chances to win. The conference happens September 4th and 5th, 2025, live from London. But with this live stream ticket, you'll get front row access to 17 expert speakers, 2 groundbreaking panel discussions, and the latest research and recovery insights from global leaders in the field. But hurry, the draw is happening September 1st. This giveaway is hosted by Food Addiction Solutions and Sweet Sobriety. And here's the best part. Your donation doesn't just get you in the draw, it helps us fund the science, the community, and the advocacy that's changing lives. So check the show notes for the link. Don't forget to include your name and email so we can reach out to you if you win. Let's build a healthier future together. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others, and hopefully the message will spread.
The GLP1s help for craving reduction, but for how long? Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am your host today, along with Clarissa Kennedy. Today, we speak with Dr. Nicole Avena, who is back with us to talk about her new study that has just come out about the GLP1s and food cravings. Dr. Nicole Avena is an associate professor of neuroscience at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York, as well as a visiting professor of health psychology at Princeton University. She received her PhD in neuroscience and psychology from Princeton and a postdoc fellowship in molecular biology at Rockefeller University. She's authored numerous books, including Why Diets Fail Because You're Addicted to Sugar, What to Eat When You're Pregnant, What to Feed Your Baby and Toddler, and Sugarless, a 7-step plan to uncover hidden sugars, curb your cravings, and conquer your addiction. Her research has been featured in publications such as Time Magazine, Bloomberg, Business Week, and New York Times, and she has appeared on television programs such as Dr. Oz and The Doctors. Today, we will be discussing the most recent study that she was involved in, medical hypothesis that examines how GLP-1 receptor agonists may negatively adverse dopamine regulation, addiction, and mood. We at Food Junkies are especially interested to know how this drug may impact those who are taking this drug for their food addiction. So welcome back, Nicole.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm very happy to be back. Love speaking with you as always.
When we last spoke with you a couple of years ago, what's happened in your life in terms of food addiction?
Wow, that's a great question. I feel that a lot has happened. I think there's been, in my opinion, having been in this space in terms of the research for over 20 years now, what really sticks to me is that in the past couple of years, there has just been such a growing interest in understanding the science behind food addiction. And I've been just recently, I was in the Middle East giving a presentation on food addiction and sugar addiction. It's really become something that, compared to in the very beginning when most medical doctors did not really want to hear about food addiction or think it was a real thing, now we're at the point where I think that medical professionals are craving this information. They want to know what is going on because they want to help their patients, and they know that this is a real condition and there's a real science behind it. So I've been busy with presenting on different conferences and doing research, continuing to look at this big question of whether or not food is addictive and how do we treat it if so, and how do we prevent it from happening?
Yeah, I think you'd agree the tipping point is now.
Absolutely. If it's not going to happen now, it's never going to happen. That's what I've been telling people lately. And I think that so many things, it's almost like a crescendo of bad things that have been now coming together in terms of increasing obesity rates, increasing rates of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome. All of these things continue to go up. And when you look at other countries that don't have as much processed food, you start to see the trends go up once the processed food is introduced. And as we become more dependent on highly processed foods for convenience and just because they're marketed as being healthy when in many cases they're not, we put ourselves at risk and we put other countries at risk of developing this real systemic addiction, if you will, based off of the food supply that a lot of people are using.
Now, let's get to your paper. So the paper hypothesizing glucagon-like peptide or GLP-1 agonists promote hypodopaminergic, resulting in heightened addictive reward-seeking and altered mood, breaking the bubble and adding salt to the wound. We're really interested in this because it's going against the narrative of what we're hearing. Please, most of us already know how GLP-1s work, but do you have the better understanding of how they affect cravings in the brain?
Yeah. So just to back it up, because not everybody listening is probably maybe aware of the whole background of the GLP-1 drugs, I'll just briefly talk through that. GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. And what has basically happened is that there are drugs that have been developed that are agonists to the glucagon-like peptide 1. And so they promote it. And initially these drugs, again, you've probably heard they've been around for 20 years, they're safe to use, and that's true. They were actually around originally, and they were developed originally to manage diabetes. And also recently, we've been learning as there's been an uptick in their use for other purposes, that they can have an impact on the brain's reward system. And so basically this works such that the drugs can bind to the GLP-1 receptors that are in areas of the brain that are involved in reward and motivation. And so these include the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area. And these areas of the brain are the parts of the brain that are involved in addiction. And so the idea here is that when we talk about addictions, we're talking about an overactivated dopaminergic pathway. So the research that's been conducted has suggested that these GLP-1 agonists are able to blunt the rewarding properties of palatable food. And this includes sugar-rich foods by basically reducing the dopamine release in response to these stimuli. So this is part of the way in which it can help to reduce cravings. And there's been a lot of interest in looking beyond diabetes management and beyond how these drugs might be used in terms of just affecting body weight because of this effect that they can have on the brain's reward system. Because we have to remember, we don't have just a drug system, a food system, a gambling system, right? That's all one reward system. And so if we have a drug that is able to affect that system, it could potentially speak to treating other conditions that are related to addiction as well.
Yeah, as an addictions physician, I'm actually waiting for an indication for cocaine addiction or alcohol addiction, like maybe within a year or so.
I think it will happen. And I think this is one of the limitations, as Vera, to science and medicine is that often people are seeing things in the trenches when they're working with patients, but the data aren't there yet. It's like that old N=1 experiment where I know this would work for my patient, but the indications haven't been brought down from the powers that be. But I do think that based off of the research that's being conducted in terms of how these drugs can have an impact on the brain, that we will see other indications and other conditions that can potentially have some of their symptoms managed through the use of some of these types of drugs.
We spoke with somebody who prescribes GLP-1s a lot, and she said that when used for something like an addiction, not food addiction specifically, it doesn't affect weight. It's not like the person will lose weight if they don't need to lose weight, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. I think that it's also very much, I think, going to be dose dependent. And a lot of the methods for titrating people up on these drugs is to start off on a very low dose and then eventually get up to the dose that is typically used to help to suppress appetite and help to suppress cravings and things like that. The problem is that there's a lot of variability in the sensitivity to some of the side effects. And so a lot of times people find that they can't get up to the recommended dose of what they should be taking to help them lose weight because of the side effects. But there's actually been a lot of information coming out about looking at the lower doses. And I think that when we start to put these data pieces together and tell the story of how these drugs might be beneficial to other conditions, like you're suggesting alcohol, or something where someone doesn't need to lose weight, they need to have the reward system blunted in some way, that could be the key in the dose. I think that's going to be the next piece of the story that we'll be hearing more about.
Okay. Now, in the paper, it mentions something about the GABAergic neurons. And so how does the GABA system play into this?
Yeah. So basically in the paper, I'll give a little background about the paper too and why we decided to write it. So the group that I worked on for this particular paper is a group of researchers that have been studying addiction and addiction medicine and psychiatry for years. And the just interest in seeing how these drugs and how powerful they were and how widespread they became relatively overnight in many ways was just really of interest to look at this and through the lens of what does this mean for the field of addictions in general, and what are some things we may need to be mindful of as these drugs become more and more mainstream in their use. So in the paper, we write about how these drugs work and how do they affect the different aspects of the brain reward system. And there are GLP1 receptors on GABAergic neurons, and this can have an impact, especially in the VTA, the ventral tegmental area. And this is important because GABAergic neurons, and GABA, remember, is our inhibitory neurons. They play an inhibitory role in the brain. And so when the GLP-1 agonists can activate these receptors, they can enhance GABAergic inhibition. And one of the things that's interesting about GABA is that if you think about GABA and dopamine as maybe two people fighting each other, that GABA inhibition can actually inhibit the dopamine producing neurons. And so it can dampen the dopamine reward. And so that's what makes this interesting. And that's why it can help to reduce the reinforcing effects of natural rewards like food and maybe in some cases like alcohol or other substances or other things that people are abusing.
So that's getting into the conversation about the hypodopaminergic response that GLP-1s can produce. But before we get to that, does that GABA response also make the person feel more tired, more sedated?
That's a really good question. And again, I think it's going to come down to the dose and the individual. And I think that's where proper management of these drugs needs to be in place. And this is the piece of concern I have regarding the widespread use. I'm not sure how it is for you in Canada, but here in the US, you can get these drugs without even, if you want to pay out of pocket, you can walk into a compounding pharmacy. People are ordering them online. It's very easy to get access to them where it's not very well managed by a physician or by a professional who is knowledgeable of side effects, doses, and things like that. And so that's where I get a little bit concerned, because if the dose is too high and it could produce a sedating effect, then that needs to be something to be mindful of. But I have not really heard much discussion, and I'm curious about your experience, Vera, having worked with patients who are using these drugs. I haven't heard much of a discussion about it producing a sedative effect. But we have heard a lot about other types of side effects, which tend to be more of a GI related.
I hear people saying it makes me tired. And those are often people who can't tolerate the medication in general. And that fatigue is one of the things. And when I saw the GABA, it was like benzo type of effect. But
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I have, now that you say it that way, I have heard people talk about how they feel fatigued in the sense, like physically fatigued. Not so much perhaps mentally fatigued, but perhaps that's something that can come about. But the physical fatigue is dangerous because one of the things that we do know about the use of these drugs is when people are rapidly losing weight, they're not always rapidly losing fat, they're losing muscle. And so it is extremely important when people are using them that they work out and that they're lifting weights and doing what they can to preserve their muscle. Again, it's something that we need to just be mindful of. And that's why it's important to have a provider helping you along this journey if you're using these drugs.
Now, please define hypodopaminergia and why are we concerned about this?
Yeah, so this term is used to describe basically a chronically low dopamine function, and it's in particularly in brain areas that are responsible for things like motivation and reward and executive control. And Dr. Ken Blum, who is one of the co-authors on my paper, the paper that we're talking about today, he's really spearheaded this idea in the field of addiction medicine. And so the idea here is that the GLP-1 agonists, by inhibiting dopamine activity, especially through those GABAergic mechanisms that we just talked about, it might either induce or exacerbate this low dopamine state. Now, you might be asking, okay, what's wrong with being low dopamine? The problem is that if you have a hypodopaminergic state, it's a known risk factor for a range of different compulsive behaviors and mood disturbances like anhedonia, for example, apathy, and even things like depression. So that is one of the reasons why it is so important to be mindful of side effects, not only the physical side effects, but also the mental health side effects that come about or could potentially come about as people are using these drugs, and especially as they're increasing the doses.
One of the theories about addiction is that the person is predisposed genetically or from some other reason to being already at a low dopamine state, that they're using the addictive substances just to feel normal. So this is inviting this, isn't it?
Exactly. And in many cases, it could be why people are overeating, where they're using food to self-medicate. And so they're using the food, and I've heard this from many people over the years, and I'm sure you can attest to this too, Vera, from your work with people in the field. It's something that I think is very well known among anyone who's looking at food addiction or who's worked with people who have a food addiction, that, you know, it is often the way to boost dopamine. It is often the way to make yourself feel good, but then it backfires, as most addictions do. When it becomes an addiction, you now are then stuck in this vicious spiral where, you know, you're just trying to get back to that feeling of normalness, and the substances require you to consume more and more of them in order to just feel normal. And that's where we have the escalation of intake. And when it comes to food, that's where we could potentially see people gaining weight and developing other medical conditions that are related to their body weight and the poor diet.
Okay, so how does this work then? Because people say the food noise is gone, which would imply that the dopamine is no longer creating that mental chatter. Yet you're now saying that it actually could be sought out. Explain the paradox here.
It is a paradox, and I don't know that we quite fully have it figured out. And I think that'll come with time. But one of the problems that comes with focusing in on dopamine is that we then ignore the fact that there are all of these other neurochemicals in the brain that are playing a role, that are connected to the web of the connectivity neurons that we have in our brain. And so I think that really what it boils down to is the fact that if people who have a substance use disorder, or who are at risk for substance use disorder, or feel that they're in that category of individuals who are addicted to food or have a food addiction, and that's contributing to maybe some of their issues with their body weight or their other health issues. If you have any indication of that addiction piece, it's important to be mindful of the fact that when you do use these drugs, it might bring your mood down. And if people are at risk for developing depression or have a history of developing depression or other mental health conditions, that's something to really be mindful of, because there have been reports of increased suicidal ideations among people who are using GLP-1 drugs. Now, it doesn't mean that they were committing suicide at a greater rate than the general population. It just means that they were reporting in one particular paper that there was an increase in suicidal thoughts. So again, going from thought to action is one small step. And so that's why we do, I think, need to be careful when we consider the side effects that potentially could come about when using these drugs, and make sure that we're just monitoring for them.
In history, we had a drug like rimonabant, which was an endocannabinoid blocker, and that got taken off the market for the same reason, I think. It caused suicidality. That got taken off the market. And then we had drugs like Paxil, which had a black box warning. So what's going to happen here? What do you anticipate as we see more?
Yeah, it's tough to say. And I think that's why it's so important that we continue to collect data and we continue to monitor. And it's one of the advantages of having so many people using the drugs are that we get more and more data, right? So we'll have more of a clear picture of what's actually happening with the use. So I think that's something that we'll just have to learn over time. My prediction would be that the drug wouldn't be banned. If anything, I think there maybe could be modifications to the dosing or different recommendations for individuals based off of their previous or current mental health status, or if they have comorbid conditions involving addiction, that there may be different indications of the use of the substance or the drugs for those individuals. I personally think that these drugs have been so popular and helped so many people, and just the benefits that seem to be tied to them continue to grow. I don't think that we would see them removed from the market unless we saw some really telling data that would warrant that.
Yeah. Chrissy, I'm just wondering, with your clinical experience, do you have clients that have experienced this anhedonia, and what have they done? What have you done?
Yeah, they have decided, most of them, to go off the medication, because I would say that comorbidity and addiction is like the rule rather than the exception. For most people, it's anxiety, depression, all of these things, and they try to get sober to start to feel better. And maybe they were getting some level of pleasure or you talk about that lift from using these foods in the past, and now they just are really so flat. And it's, what is the purpose of all this? Is this what life is supposed to look like in recovery? And so it's really, but also I think does blunt enjoyment in any other, from the sun, from like nature, all these other areas of their life. And is that the life that most of the clients that I work with want to live? At the end of the day, no. I think if their motivation is to lose weight, it really makes them question, is the weight worth it? If this is how I have to live the life, I would rather be in a larger body and eat in recovery. Because many of the clients that I work with, it's not even necessarily that they're not in recovery or abstinent. It's like their body has had an issue being able to release the weight they want to release in order to have that quality of life. So they go on some of these medications to have a better quality of life, but they're learning that's not the case.
What about naltrexone? That is another craving blocker. And I've actually wondered about that as also potentially blunting our ability to feel our own endogenous endorphin response. Would it be similar to that?
I believe, yeah, certainly. And I think low dose naltrexone is something that is often utilized to help reduce cravings. And, it would be interesting to see, and I'm sure that somebody's got the patent on it. If not, we should put it together and go for it. But the combination of perhaps different doses, lower doses of the GLP1s with something like naltrexone, to see if there's a way to create a super drug that would maybe not have some of the risks associated with it that we're talking about, to really help hone in on the true goal of what these drugs are meant to do, which is, and it's interesting because the term food noise, a lot of people use that. I wonder if the food noise is so interesting to me, because I wonder how that works. Like, how is it that you no longer feel is it the desire to give into some of these like prompts? Like, for example, if you walk past the bakery and you smell this delicious cake or something like that, it seems that it's like cuts off that like piece of the learning, right? That would normally lead, that priming of that stimuli would normally lead somebody to want to then go and have that food. But it seems like that is what the food noise is. Like, that just gets cut off, which I find to be just so interesting.
What about the extinguishing phenomena? That the GLP-1s, for some people, cuts the cravings, but at a certain point it stops cutting the cravings. When we interviewed Charlotte Polson, who did a PhD on the specific cravings, I think she made the distinction between sweet and savory, and that sweet lasted, I think, 6 months or something, and then the cravings came back. Can you explain anything about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not really sure how it works. I think we're just starting to learn. But one of the things that I've wondered about is, just like we build up tolerance, right, to other things, at some point, if we don't keep escalating the dose of the drug, does it just no longer work? And I think maybe for some individuals that can be the case. If there's like a certain category of preferred foods that, are very desirable, at some point, there's just this extinction of the ability for the drug to. It's almost like it was a wall that was put up and the sweets were pushing against it so hard that eventually the wall falls down. But in terms of the mechanism of action of how that works, I'm not quite sure that we understand that yet. But it is interesting because it seems to be very category specific for some people, where it does cut out their desire for certain types of foods. And it does seem to cut out the general like grazing for food and just not like wanting to eat it when you're hungry. It really does. And that's why a lot of people who are taking the drugs often will lose weight excessively because they just don't feel that desire to even eat at all. And so it is really interesting how these mechanisms work in terms of what aspect of appetite is being cut off and how long will that last.
I think that also has to do with the fatigue that people are feeling is because they're starving themselves, essentially. Like they don't even have enough physical energy to do the things they need to be doing. But it's, again, I think that's also that piece of that anhedonia where they don't even go to have the energy or desire to seek anything anyway.
Right. And I think this is why, much like everything in life, it has to be a holistic approach, right? It can't just be here, take this drug and you'll lose weight. That's not going to work. It has to be about understanding that you can take the drug, but you need to keep working out because that's going to increase your endorphins and help your mental health. It's also going to help retain your muscle mass, and learning to understand the different strategies so that you can select foods that are going to give you the right amount of nutrients so that you don't end up depriving yourself of essential nutrients, which can lead to like hair loss. It can lead to, again, more lethargy and fatigue. And so I think it really does need to be a more educational approach to this. And it has to be kind of part of a package of tools that are being utilized to help people to manage their weight. And I don't know if that's being done enough. I just think that they've been marketed as and promoted in many ways. And I think this is because a lot of like celebrities are using them and things like that as really just a quick fix, but it's not. And I think that people are going to find that they're more successful with using them if they actually approach it from that way so that they don't develop a lot of these issues that we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say the clients that I work with, their physicians are just like, okay, we can be on this for this. And then we really want to get you to that highest dose. That is where they're pushing them rather than saying, what does it feel like to start at this dose? And how long could we stay there? And what would that look like? Instead, they're pushing, and then clients are having crazy symptoms and then just saying, this is too much. I don't want it, or I'm sick all the time. So of course I'm not eating.
And one of the things that's so interesting to me, and I guess this is because in the studies that were done to get the FDA to approve it in the US, this was the dose. There was this sort of ramping up of the dose. And so that's the therapeutic dose that you want to get to. But my question about that is, what if like people are on a lower dose, maybe losing weight a little more slowly, but they're not having all these side effects, and they're also then not having the anhedonia, they're not having the fatigue, so that they can actually like have the clarity of mind to be thinking about what they're eating and really understand what's happening, as opposed to just being so nauseous and like sick all the time that you're not eating for that reason. So I wonder if that will change. I wonder if there will be, because I know from some of the experiences I've had here in the US, that insurance companies will deny the drug if you don't go up, which to me is ridiculous, because if you're doing well with it at a lower dose, why would you force somebody to take more of something? So it's very interesting.
No, I love what you're saying there, because I think what I'm hearing is like you could actually be using these medicines in order to help create the pause, to create the ability to mindfully eat rather than and create relationship with food and hunger and fullness versus just trying to eliminate it, which I think is what people want.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that to me, just from my background doing research on appetite, to me, it sounds like people who are struggling with the higher doses, who have a lot of the side effects, I wonder if it's just a conditioned taste aversion. You just get a generalized conditioned taste aversion to food.
Because it's the nauseousness that follows.
Yes, that is exactly what my clients report over and over again.
Yeah.
Which I think is very different than feeling, oh, I'm taking this drug and I just don't feel like eating all the time, or I don't feel like I need to have this huge portion. I feel like I'll be satisfied with a smaller amount. That I think should be the goal. I feel like if people are having a lot of these side effects, I really do think it's very much dose dependent. But for some reason, there's been this big push to get people up on the higher doses, which I still don't know if I agree with.
Hey, Food Junkies listeners. We're just going to take a quick break here to share with you something our team thinks could help benefit your recovery with food, body, or self. Thank you again for listening.
Hey there, Food Junkies listeners. Have you grabbed your ticket yet for the International Food Addiction and Comorbidities Conference 2025? It's happening September 4th and 5th in London, England at the iconic Royal College of General Practitioners. This is the global gathering for professionals passionate about tackling food addiction and its related conditions like type 2 diabetes, mental health disorders, cardiovascular disease, and more. Come learn from world-renowned experts like Dr. Georgia E., Dr. Nicole Avena, Dr. Nasha Winters, Dr. Erica Lafata, Dr. David Wiss, Dr. Kim Dennis, Professor Adrian Sotomoda, Karen Thompson, Dr. Ignacio Caranta, and Dr. Trocalasian, plus insights from UNICEF's Mara Brero on transforming food environments for kids. Earn up to 13 continuing professional development hours, enjoy a nourishing midday meal all included in your ticket, and connect with clinicians, researchers, and change makers from around the world. Early bird tickets, 1-day, 2-day, and live stream tickets are on sale now, but only for a limited time. Head to the show notes and secure your spot at IFAC 2025. Let's move this conversation and this movement forward.
Now back to the show. If you have enjoyed this episode, please let us know. We love to hear from you. Kindly leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to our podcast on. We love getting feedback from our listeners.
I want to go back to the tolerance and the extinction. There appears to be some tolerance that develops at some point. You'd agree with that, right? Because anything we put in our body, we eventually become tolerant to.
Yeah.
Is it possible, especially if we're pushing to higher doses, that the highest dose just won't work anymore, maybe in year 2 or 3? And then I know that more, not GLP1s, but similar type of mechanisms are being added, triple ones, even quadruple. And then this is my worst case scenario. The person is now maxed out on all of those. I see this with psychiatric drugs all the time. They're on 5 or 6 meds and it's not doing anything anymore.
No.
So then when they get off, have they messed up their hormonal circuitry and their reward circuitry, that dopamine receptor, which has been suppressed? And what have we left the person with?
Right. That's why I think that the goal should never, ever to be just take the drug and it'll work for you. It should be, okay, what is my food situation, my food environment? Why am I eating these foods? Why am I craving them? And getting at the psychology of it so that if, you do get tolerant to it, you've at least developed the toolkit.
Yes.
Manage it in a different way. I'm not saying it's going to be as effective, but it still gives you something to have. And I just, again, like I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see more of that out there. I'd like to see this as a piece of a package that is going to teach you the skills and the strategies beyond just, oh, here, take the drug and you won't be hungry. Because
I think that's where we're positioning ourselves. We food addiction clinicians is we're here for when you want to get off this stuff or you want to slowly start to wean. You need our tools.
The other thing is, and I've heard this from a lot of people who are using the drug, what if the pharmacy's out of stock? What if they can't get it? What if something happens in the plant where it's manufactured? Like, this happens all the time. What happened like a few months ago with baby food baby formula, when there was like this concern over baby formula because the facility was shut down that produced it because it had contamination. So anything can happen. So to be completely reliant on the drug, I think, is a bad idea, especially when there are things that you can do, right, to support yourself and to support your relationship with food outside of just the drug.
Should there be some people that should not be on it because they're predisposed to severe mental health issues or addiction?
Yeah. So again, I am not a medical doctor, but doing research in this space and looking at the studies that have been going on and the case reports about things that are coming in, I would not suggest that somebody who has previous history of suicide attempts or previous severe depression, previous mental health conditions in that capacity be using the drugs without extremely careful medical supervision and monitoring of their mental health. Again, it is something that I think many people have been very successful using, but I do think we need to be careful about the populations that are vulnerable for some of these mental health effects. I also have not heard much about this, but my concern, and you mentioned, Vera, about your biggest concern is this whole like plateauing and people being on all these drugs and then it all falling apart. My biggest concern is that people are going to start pushing this toward overweight children. I haven't heard that happening because, as my understanding, it's only approved for use in adults. It's one thing if you're an adult and you're making your own decisions and you've maybe had a lifetime of struggles where you've tried all these different strategies and things have not worked. But my concern is like we saw with bariatric surgery, right?
Yeah.
Where they're doing bariatric surgery on children. And I think, yes, maybe there's rare extreme cases where that might be necessary, but there's no way you've tried everything with a child in terms of trying to reshape their food environment and trying to reshape their habits around food, that you've exhausted all efforts at this point when they're only a child. So that's my biggest concern, is that these drugs will start to be used in kids, but we'll see where that goes.
So there was mention about genetic testing in the paper. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So I think that there is an opportunity. And again, we're so fortunate now because we have access to so much biometric data. We can connect to our devices to learn about our heart rate. We have all this stuff that we can do to learn about ourselves. And the genetic testing piece is also an important part of that. And so for individuals who have certain alleles to the dopamine gene that might put them in that like hypodopaminergic category, I think there's an opportunity for testing to be done to know about that. And that potentially could be maybe a biomarker for people who might want to either not use the drug or use with caution, or again, use under extreme supervision of a specialist.
The title, Breaking the Bubble and Adding Salt to the Wound. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, we went back and forth about how to title the paper. I think one of the things that people have been saying about the GLP-1 drugs is that they were basically breaking the obesity bubble, right? The weight loss drug bubble has been growing for years and years. No company has really developed that like golden ticket drug that really works. And this one does. These do. These GLP-1 drugs, they do work. They help people lose weight. They're successful. And so I think that they've broken the bubble, right? But are we adding salt to the wound by, this might be great that we're helping all these people lose weight, but at the same time, are we introducing another problem with the low dopamine, with the anhedonia, with the lack of motivation? So that's really, I think, the sort of crux of what that part of the title was trying to get at. And I think this happens a lot in medicine and science where, we fix something, but in the process, we're breaking something else or damaging something else. So we just need to be mindful of that. I often talk about with tobacco, for example, and when we did a lot to help to make sure that the dangers of tobacco use were becoming more and more apparent in the 60s, 70s. And a lot of people stopped using cigarettes, which is great. We don't want people smoking. But then they all started overeating processed food, and we introduced all the sugar into the food industry. And so we had solved one problem of, we were able to scare people out of smoking and prevent kids from starting to smoke cigarettes much more than we were ever able to. But we also then had people turning toward another problem. So again, I think we just need to keep that in mind when we look at these sort of...
Is the phrase a second wave of dying to lose weight? Very colorful phrase. Is that sort of capturing the same thing?
Yeah. When you think about it, like people are taking these drugs in many cases because they're dying to lose weight in the sense that they are exhausted from having tried so many things over the years, none of which have maybe worked for them. And it's extremely frustrating and it's extremely hard to live like that. But again, you might be dying to lose weight because it's been a goal. But then like Clarissa was saying, maybe when that happens, if you're also then experiencing these negative thoughts and these anhedonia, you don't want to feel like that. So I think that it's really about understanding how this is going to fit into our understanding of what weight loss means to people and whether or not, like she was saying, it's worth it.
Or real. I think we've been sold by the diet industry our whole lives that weight loss equals happiness and satisfaction. And that's not actually what I think people are achieving with this drug.
I think that's it's unfortunate that people are experiencing that, but I think it's good that we're getting awareness about that coming out so that more people can understand that you can't base your self-worth on anything, any one thing, especially your weight. But I see this all the time, people who base their whole self-worth on their career or their whole self-worth on being a parent. And that is just, you realize that's not it. Yourself is so multidimensional and it has to be comprised of so many different wonderful things that you're a part of, not just one thing. And I think that's what happens in this case when people focus so much on losing weight and then they realize it's really not about weight loss making me happy.
Okay. The GLP-1s, is it not letting the big food off the hook?
Your question is it letting big food off the hook?
Yeah, because we're focusing on us and how we don't want to be enticed by the food industry, but they're the ones that are doing it in the first place.
That's the thing about it. It's, again, I'm not anti or pro anything. I'm pro people and their happiness. That's the only thing I'm really divided on. But I think that the food industry in many ways is capitalizing on this because there's a lot of products that are coming out that you'll start to see GLP-1 friendly on the food product because it's going to have more fiber in it because constipation is a side effect of using GLP-1s, or it'll be fortified with more nutrients because one of the things that happens when people are using GLP-1 drugs is sometimes they're not eating enough. And so they're going to become nutrient deficient. And so I think the whole concept of, is the food industry getting off the hook? They shouldn't be getting off the hook, but in many ways, they're actually making even more off of this. It is interesting to me, though, that, and again, I think this is because I've been talking about processed foods for so many years and their dangers and all the added sugar, how we have this sort of looming problem of, we have all these foods that are bad for us and they're harming us. Instead of doing something about that, we leave them there and then say, here, you can just take this injection and then you won't want them. To me, it's just so interesting. And I'm trying to figure out a better way to articulate that conundrum that I have in my mind around that, because it would make more logical sense to just get rid of the thing that's hurting you.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, here, take this. It's almost if you had a burglar in your house and the burglar said, here, just put on these sunglasses and you won't see me robbing everything from you. Wouldn't it make more sense to get rid of the burglar than just cover up? I don't know. So yeah, it's an important question. I do think that they're getting away with more than they should be.
I'm making the assumption that everyone will eventually become tolerant, but am I being pessimistic? Is it possible that you could find the perfect dose and the person could be on this and it'd be effective for 20 years?
People have been using these drugs for quite some time for diabetes management. And part of that involves weight loss. That's one of the ways in which they're effective for diabetes is they help people lose weight, which helps them manage their diabetes better. I would say that we'll have to wait and see. I think that I would not be shocked if we start to see changes in the recommendations for the escalation of the doses, because the reality is if, you can find lower doses that are going to be effective, maybe not as rapidly effective, but as effective without the side effects, then the tolerance, if it is developing, it's going to take much longer to develop.
Yeah. Okay.
So it would be in the best interest, I think, of companies to really look at that piece of it to see if that's the way to go.
Okay. Now, I wanted to ask you, this is a slightly different question. Kevin Hall's most recent paper. Now, I've been wondering, because you are one of the first people talking about sugar addiction. And he just published a paper, which I'm sure you know about, saying, no, actually, that's not really true. So what's your response to that? I've been waiting to ask you this question.
Unfortunately, it's tied up with, I will say that me and my colleagues have submitted a response to Cell Metabolism, a letter to the editor outlining our concerns in response to the data that was presented in that paper. We are awaiting it to be published. I'm waiting every day. I check my email to see if the editor has sent me a note saying it's coming out. But yes, I will say, because I'd love for everyone to wait to hear my response till it comes out in the proper academic way, which is through the journals and in response to the paper by the author. But I would say that we need to keep in mind that, again, discounting 20-something plus years of research that's been done in different models and with different techniques, humans, clinical, just because one study, which had very few people in it, didn't find the same findings, it would not be what I would do. I think it went a little bit beyond the data to then just call into question the whole idea that food could be addictive to begin with. So and then there's some methodological concerns that I have about the way the study was conducted. But again, like I said, I'm hoping Cell Metabolism will hopefully be publishing it very soon. If not, it'll be put out there in some other way. We're going to make sure we get it out there soon.
All right, thank you, and I'll wait for your response. Another question about the rebound effect of when a person stops the GLP-1. Why is it so profound? Is it just because the person stopped and so the effectiveness is wearing off? But it seems like it's almost immediate. So is there something else because the brain has changed in response?
Yes. So I've heard this from quite a few people who I've worked with who have taken the drug and then for one reason or another had to stop. That it is immediate. It does seem to be very quick. And again, the people who have done the work on the side of the drug where they're trying to learn the tools and the skills and the strategies and preparing their food differently, and they seem to maybe not have it rebound as quickly and not have it as profound. But yes, that it does really seem to come on abruptly. And again, if you go back to what we were talking about in the very beginning about how the drugs work, if you have something like these GLP-1 drugs that are basically increasing GABA, which is the inhibitory neurotransmitter, and then you take that away, guess what? The GABA isn't going to be increased anymore. It's going to decrease, right? And so that means you're not going to have the inhibition that typically happens within your brain. And so you're going to become very uninhibited in a very short amount of time. And that's what I think leads to a lot of these sort of intense rebound cravings and overeating and other things that can come about when people cease using the drug.
I'm very excited that Dr. Avena is going to be a speaker at our conference, our International Food Addiction and Comorbidities Conference coming up in September. Can you let the people know a little bit about what you hope to talk about there?
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to the conference. I think it's going to be amazing. The speaker lineup is phenomenal. There's so many interesting people that'll be there. So it's definitely something that people should check out. And if you can't make it all the way to London, that's fine because there will be a live stream as well. So anybody anywhere in the world can watch it and learn from all of the amazing people that will be in attendance. So it's really a great opportunity. We're going to be talking about some of our newer studies. I'm planning to talk a little bit about some of the newer things that we're talking about with GLP-1 drugs and also a developmental component, really focusing on early life experience and, how we can think about this whole concept of ultra-processed food addiction as it relates to children, because the hope is to be able to prevent this from being a problem at all. And a lot of that is going to start with really working with youth and young people and helping to understand what's happening in the brain of young people that puts them at greater risk for developing a food addiction, and what can we do to mitigate that and hopefully prevent it from starting in the first place.
Right, which makes so much sense because we know the earlier that youth use substances, the more likely they are to become dependent. And we know that from alcohol use disorder, nicotine as well. And so, of course, it makes sense for ultra-processed food use disorder as well.
Absolutely.
Do you have any words of advice to give somebody who's in the food addiction world that's contemplating using GLP-1s?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I stumbled across on one of the social media sites that you manage, a support site. I stumbled across a post recently where a user of the post, one of the people who was a part of the group that was posting something about their concern that they were going to be judged because they were thinking about using a GLP-1 drug. And they had this idea that the food addiction community was anti-GLP-1. And I believe you responded, Vera, and I thought it was very eloquent and clear that, yeah, if people need to use these drugs, then that's their choice. And we're here to support you, regardless of what aspect of the journey or path you're going down. And I think that for some people, if you're struggling with a food addiction, I think that these drugs can be helpful in some cases, but maybe in some cases they can be harmful because of the addictive nature of what you're experiencing. And so I think it's very important that if you are considering them, to do your research, to really think it through, look at the studies, and really just do it with the support of a medical professional that can help you monitor your side effects and to help you be more successful at using the drugs. The drugs don't work if you can't take them. And so if you decide you want to take them, I think it's important to make sure that you're doing it in such a way that you're going to be able to have them be beneficial, but not have the side effects, whether they're physical or in terms of your mental health.
I think it's so important to acknowledge that don't do it on your own. There's such a high rate of people quitting, getting off of them within the first year. And having a medical professional to guide you through that, as well as all of the potential side effects. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Okay, what is next for you? I know there's the conference coming up. Do you have a book coming out as well?
Yeah, gosh, I have quite a few different things going on. We're always busy. We have several different papers that we're working on at the moment. I have a book that is an academic book. It was called Hedonic Eating that I edited. Right. Yes. And so the second edition of that will be coming out. So we've updated the book. The book was published initially 10 years ago, and as the science has really changed a lot. And so I'm really excited for that to be coming out. We're in the final process of finishing up the page proofs. And so hopefully that'll be out within the next couple of months. So I'm really excited about that.
It might be out by September then.
I hope. Yes, I think it could be. I think it can be. Yeah, I'm the one slowing it down at this point because I'm taking my time sifting through these pages because I want it to be perfect. But I'm going to get on that and hopefully we will see it out in September.
Okay. Now, we're not going to ask you the signature question, but do you have any final comments in the field of food addiction, your hopes for where it's going?
I got to be honest, I love where it's been going. I love that there's so much awareness about the need for social support and the fact that others are going through this as well and you're not alone. I think that it's just important that we continue having discussions about the science and learning about what's happening in the brain in response to these different foods. And I also think it's important that we keep our eye on what's going on in the food industry and understanding how a lot of these ingredients, a lot of the sugar, a lot of the other things that are being put into our food are just negatively impacting our health. And at the same time, they're also exacerbating our addictions to these foods. I think that the field's going in a great direction. I hope it continues down that path of always being very science-based. I think that's been something that the food addiction community has been rooted in. And I just hope that we can get to a point where we have treatments for people, support for people, and also can prevent this from happening in the first place by educating parents and also young people.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much, Nicole, for spending time with us again.
Oh, I'm happy to. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group, I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.